Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's town hall discussion. My name is Kirsten McLean, and I currently have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Coalition for Music Education in Canada. We're very pleased to be here tonight, but before we begin the meeting, I would just like to advise everyone that this meeting is being recorded. Before we begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that from where I am hosting this evening in Prince Edward Island, that I am hosting this meeting on the land of the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq of Prince Edward Island. And I would invite all of you to take a moment to pause and offer your own acknowledgement from wherever you may be in this beautiful country of ours. Well, welcome. I'm very excited to welcome you all here tonight for what promises to be a very informational, stimulating, and inspiring town hall discussion. And I'm going to now pass the microphone over to one of our board members, Kirk Wasmer, and Kirk is going to introduce our special guests. Take it away, Kirk.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I just, first of all, want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Treaty 7 territory, just a little north of Calgary, and respectfully acknowledge that. So happy to introduce tonight's speakers to you. I was really lucky to see their presentation that they put on as part of the BC Music Educators Association conference, and there was so much great information in that brought this back to the coalition board table, and we decided that this was certainly worth spreading to a broader audience. So happy that Cindy and Karen could join us tonight to speak of the work of their group in saving the music program in Victoria. So welcome, Cindy, welcome, Karen. Turn things over to you.
Good evening or afternoon as it is here in BC. My name is Cindy Rhompf. I'm a second generation visitor here in Canada. I'm a visitor here on the land of the Kwan people, including Songhees Nation and Esquimalt Nation, the Wasanic people. As a music educator of almost 19 years, I am forever grateful for the stewardship and teachings of the Indigenous peoples across this land we call BC, so that we can continue our love of music with our students. And I am also the current past president of the BC MEA and the current president of the Greater Victoria Music Educators Association. And I'm a middle school music teacher. I teach band and choir, a little bit of choir, and a little bit of strings at Cedar Hill Middle School.
Good evening or afternoon from the West Coast, as Cindy said. My name is Karen Kwan, and I'm a third generation visitor on the lands of the Kwangin and Wasanich nations. I would like to acknowledge the historical stewardship and relationship to the lands and territories that these people that continues on today. I thank them for being caretakers of the land and its resources. I come to you today as a former educator, a private sector employee with both a finance and human resources background, but first and foremost as a parent and advocate of education, music education in particular. I've known Cindy for many years. She's taught my 3 daughters and is currently teaching my 3rd daughter. She's still with Cindy.
Okay, I am just going to share our presentation. The 2020-2021 school year was one of the most difficult years for music educators and music families in the Greater Victoria School District, not only because of the global pandemic and teaching through it, but also because the superintendent of schools proposed to cut all middle school music programs in their entirety, all of our grade 5 strings programs, in our district ukulele program. SD61 had a $10 million deficit, as they say, if that were true or not. And we're looking at ways to reduce this. And unfortunately, music, along with other vital programs, were on the chopping block. SD61 has 10 middle schools with flourishing music programs, with participation rates at some schools as high as almost 80% of the school population. There are grade 5 strings programs at 16 elementary schools where participation rates are at least 70% of all grade 5 students at each school. Our strings programs have been in our school district since 1914. Our district Island Ukulele enrolls students from grades K to 12 and is a program that has been around for 40 years. These proposed cuts would have affected approximately 3,000 students. This whole process was the most stressful thing we have ever experienced and was quite traumatizing. However, through strong advocacy work and events, we were successful in saving our music programs for the current year we are in. There were many factors that led to our successful campaign: previous district support, a strong and active LSA, strong music programs at our schools, music parents associations at each middle school, and community support. This isn't the first time our school board wanted to significantly cut music programs. 20 years ago, there was a huge public fight to keep our strings programs. That was when the original AMUS, Advocacy for Music in Our Schools, was formed, and through that advocacy group, our strings program was kept. I started teaching the year after this fight was won. The success of the music programs was because of a former student superintendent named John Gateman. When he became superintendent in 2002, he oversaw the implementation of the middle school model in our district. And with this new organization, he had a vision of having successful music programs in every elementary, middle, and secondary school. He saw music programs as one of the main hooks for keeping students in schools and being successful. So under the guidance of veteran music teachers Bonnie Smith and Fred Hagan, he came up with a plan and a funding model on how to support these programs. With this district vision and support, music programs exploded and flourished. Because in previous years, music was threatened to be cut, Bonnie Smith and Fred Hagan saw the need to have a strong local specialist association. So she and he started what is now the Greater Victoria Music Educators Association. The GVMEA is very active and meets regularly throughout the year, organizing Pro-D events, social events, district music events, and more. There are representatives of each teaching area of elementary, middle, secondary, and strings on the executive, and we all do our best to support one another. There's a strong connection between us music teachers because a lot of us went to university together. There are social events that people can participate in and get to know each other more. And us middle school teachers even have our own Facebook chat group, which we seem to just, post things daily, it seems. Our music programs also had strong ties to our community music groups such as the Victoria Symphony, Pacific Opera, UVic, and the Victoria Conservatory of Music. Each of these groups have integrated programs in our schools, such as an elementary opera program where the Pacific Opera would come and perform and put on workshops for schools. The Victoria Symphony has a clinician program where members of their ensemble would work directly with students in our schools. They also held concerts specific to the elementary level. These programs have been going on in our school district for over 20 years. Over the years through our LSA, we have held district advocacy efforts throughout the year. For example, music in the malls, where ensembles would play in the malls. Victoria Sings, where all the choirs in every elementary, middle, and secondary school would, over 4 nights, put on concerts. Ukes Unlimited, all the ukulele programs in every elementary, middle school, and also the Island Ukes would perform. District Strings Orchestra Finale, which would involve every single strings student in our district. And the Rhompf Cycle, which we had representatives of each type of ensemble, and it was integrated with the Victoria Symphony. These events were all well advertised and covered by local media. All were public and well-attended events. The GVTA is the Greater Victoria Teachers Association. The relationship between our LSA and GVTA has evolved and developed over the past 20 years. Previously, the executive didn't really have very much knowledge of music education and didn't quite know how to support us. They felt back then a teacher is a teacher is a teacher, and this actually went up to the provincial level too with the BCTF. Now, we have a number of music teachers involved on the GVTA board, as well as in executive positions. Our current GVTA president, Winona Waldron, is a music parent, and her children are very involved in the performing arts. Carolyn Howe is our former first VP, is an elementary music teacher. Because we now have music educators highly involved in our local union, we feel supported. There is a strong connection because there is now insight into our specialty area, and there's understanding about the needs in relation to our specialty. There is no longer the fear that we won't be supported due to a lack of understanding in our subject area and its importance. I knew that staffing packages were supposed to come out at a certain date at our schools and in our district. And when that day came, I hounded my principal. Even after I went home for the day, I texted him and I phoned him asking. And he was really, really quite hesitant to even talk to me about it. Then he told me all middle school music was being proposed to be cut completely. And I was in shock, and I contacted my teaching partner, Melissa McKnight, who teaches the majority of our choir and our strings program at my school. And I told her the news. And then after that, I had a good cry for about an hour and a half. And then I got really, really, really angry. Then I went to work contacting people. I contacted other middle school music teachers to see what was happening with them and to see if it was true. And then I sent an email to the entire LSA membership about the cut and organized a meeting. And then I did the same with our music parents at our school. And yeah, then I sent an email to the GVTA president and vice president to let them know and ask for help. And the GVTA was so actually quite supportive and wonderful through this entire budget process. Then I emailed the CMEBC, which is the Coalition for Music Education in BC, for help. And I created a list of all community groups in Victoria, music groups, and emailed them to let them all know of the drastic cuts to music and organize a meeting for everyone to meet to discuss these cuts. And I've never ever been so angry and upset in my entire life. It was quite devastating. So I started brainstorming and writing down advocacy ideas and events that we could do. And I thought it was time to resurrect the old Advocacy for Music in Schools group. And I was lucky enough to be a part of this group at the beginning of my career. So I still had contact information of former members. Then I sent an email to the district office asking to be a speaker at the next board meeting. Then I contacted a few music parents like Karen and Cheryl, who is also at the time was on our music parents board, to see if they were willing to speak and present as well. The Cedar Hill Music Parents meeting was very enlightening and also very comforting in that it was great to know how well our music program was supported by parents.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about AMUS. Of course, as Cindy mentioned, AMUS stands this time around for Advocacy for Music in Schools. And as Cindy mentioned earlier, this title was resurrected from a group that was formed in the mid-90s when parents were fighting with the school district to keep music in schools. I initially heard about the cuts from Cindy. She needed a parent basically to, kind of take the helm, because as a teacher, she couldn't be seen as going against her employer, which is the district, of course. After the announcement of a possible cut to all middle school and elementary school music, we held a large Zoom meeting with concerned parents from our own middle school, which is Cedar Hill Middle School. This was an open meeting with discussion and ideas on how to move forward. One of our parents was able to take notes from that meeting. I met with that parent the next day, and it turns out she's a project manager, and we just discussed about the meeting and some of the things that came out of it, and realized that there were really 4 or 5 themes that kept coming up in the meeting. And from those themes, we were actually able to create subcommittees for AMUS. And those subcommittees were finance and risk analysis, research, publicity and media, events and volunteers, and administration. We then held a district-wide Zoom meeting with parents, stakeholders, teachers, and community partners. And in that meeting, we introduced the committees and asked attendees to break into those smaller subcommittee groups using breakout rooms, of course, in Zoom. We asked the committees to consider the following questions. First of all, to elect or appoint a chair of your subcommittee. Then to talk a little bit about scheduling and timeline, like plan and execution. How often were you going to meet and all of that kind of stuff. Then we wanted to know what the subcommittee's messaging was going to be. We had a lot of focus on middle school music, but we didn't want to forget about grade 5 strings. And then there were other programs for vulnerable students that weren't necessarily music related, but were really important as well. So we wanted to, decide whether our message should include those other programs and the vulnerable students involved. We talked a little bit about communication, how the subcommittee was going to communicate and how they're going to plan together. And then, maybe just divvying out what each key member of the subcommittee was responsible for. We also wanted to know if there were any costs that needed to be covered by the group that we needed to plan for, what initiatives would be most effective, and then just address some public misconceptions. For example, a lot of the talk was music is only available to those who can afford it. So why are we allowing music in our schools? And so, obviously that's not true. There are definitely provisions for students who cannot not afford music, and they can still participate just as anyone else can. But just addressing some of those misconceptions and how we can turn that around was a big thing coming out of that. So I'll just quickly go into, try not to go into too much depth, but just on each of the committees and what they kind of came up with from this meeting. So finance and risk analysis, first of all, they wanted to look at the budget and examine it in depth. They wanted to examine past financial statements, examine other cuts that could make up for the cuts to music, like what could we possibly switch. And they wanted to also discover what the cost to the district is if you cut music. So, not all costs are actually monetary. And so, that was something they wanted to dive into. The school district, and they also wanted to address, and this was more of a risk analysis of other programs that the district would maybe put up against music, equally important issues that might actually make our cause seem less of an issue if they had to cut something else instead. So, really looking to try to get in there before they started pitting groups against each other, and then come up with solutions or alternative ways for the school district to address the shortfall. So, maybe giving them some ideas on how we can keep music and still not have a deficit. The research committee wanted to research backgrounds of the superintendent, the secretary treasurer, and all the trustees, really know what they stand for, and do any of them have political aspirations, who's on our side, who's not, who do we think that we could get, to vote against cutting music. Also look at some top heavy aspects of the district. Right now, we still have 14 principals, district principals and vice principals, and that's not including any superintendents or deputy or associate superintendents. For a 20,000 population district, that's quite top heavy. They also wanted to look at which MLAs and trustees to focus on, which was kind of going back to backgrounds, and also looking into which celebrities who might support our cause and making a list of those. Then they wanted to look into other school districts. How do other school districts structure their budget? How is their money spent? Would music survive under these cuts? Have other districts seen that happen? They also wanted to look into middle school model and funding and see how that, how in the Ministry of Education that works. And then there was one last thing. We had heard about something called an RACS, or the Representative Council of Students. And these are grade 12 students, one from each school, that meet with the superintendent monthly. And we actually wanted to connect with these students and see what their thoughts were, and whether, there was some leverage that way, and whether they could speak on behalf of their music programs in their schools. Then going on to the publicity and media subcommittee, they looked at coordinated social media initiatives. So really, making these things happen at the same time. Again, coordination with the media, and lists of hashtags that we can use. Looking at a centralized location for all information, and they ended up creating a website where parents who wanted to advocate could go and get ideas of letters for writing to our trustees or to our MLAs. There's lots of information on there on how to make your own lawn sign, and just all of the information on the events that were happening as well. Again, they talked about celebrity supporters. They also talked about a designated spokesperson, so they thought it was really important to have one person consistently say, with the message from Amos and talking to the media. And then they wanted to develop a stakeholder and influencer list, which could also be used for social media. And then again, developing board meeting messaging and making sure our messaging stayed consistent. They talked about letter writing, and then, out of all of this stuff, we got a celebrity supporter, which was really great for our cause. Ended up happening right at the same time as we did a huge event. And so Cindy's going to play you the video right now of David Foster.
My life. Bob Bergeson gave me the freedom in band class to really reach a potential that I thought I had, but I just didn't know how to get there. Dave Dunnett from nearby Oak Bay School went out on a limb to help me in ways that I can't describe. And I still think about those two men almost every day of my life. Band was my savior. Sadly, I wasn't a very good student, but music and band in school was the one bright light for me. This is the God's honest truth. I would not be the musician I am today if it weren't for this school program. I lived it, I loved it, and I appreciate it every walking day of my life. Most people know the statistics of children that have music in their lives. They are better students, they're better citizens, and it keeps them focused and less likely to wander. I was certainly no angel or star pupil during my high school years, but music and band and those great teachers kept me out of trouble, and I learned valuable lessons. Not just about music, but also how to work as a team player and think about more than just myself. Now, as I said before, we all agree that times are tough. With 10 middle schools and 28 elementary schools, it seems like a drop in the bucket, but these are real lives, real teachers who deserve to make a good living, and students that deserve to be taught the universal language of music. I'm a guy from Victoria who benefited so greatly from what the schools had to offer me. And there are plenty more like me still to come that want to have music in their lives. I want to thank my longtime friend and collaborator, BJ Cook, who has been such an advocate for music in the schools for many, many years. I join her now in hoping that the powers that be, will take my story to heart and really try to keep the music programs alive in those 38 schools and all the schools in Victoria. The students need it, the teachers deserve it, and the world will be a better place for it. Thank you for listening. I am a grateful student.
Yeah, that was a big deal, and it was pretty neat how we ended up having him submit this video to us. Yeah, it was pretty neat, and that's another story to be told another time. Events and volunteers was another section of Amos, and we had a lot of protests, and because of COVID, all in-person protests were physically distanced. And because of the short time frame, we organized a protest once a week at major intersections and at or near schools around the district. We had a protest at the school board office, a drive-by, and performers, and that was really loud and actually was a lot of fun. Yeah, because all the school board employees were in there having a meeting, so it was quite funny. We also had, I'll go back. We also had a final massive protest, and we created a line of people all distanced, and each family and people that were protesting were all distant, and we created a line from the school board office, went down the major street of Victoria all the way down to our legislature. And we had a timed speech that everybody said at the same time. We also had involved other areas being cut, like reading recovery, EAs, and counseling, and speeches from middle school and secondary music students. At all online board meetings to quietly protest against the cuts, almost all teachers, parents, and participants all had the same background, red for ed, then one also for music education. We had a speaker and presenter at almost every board meeting in support of music education from that point on. We also had posters and lawn signs, and we approached almost all the businesses in Victoria, around, and especially around the school board, to put up a sign for people to put in their car windows, for windows at home, for people to put them on their lawns, so the trustees and board office employees can see how many people in our city was in support of music education. We had a QR code at the Amos that led everybody to the Amos website for more information. We had TikTok videos. We also had virtual protests, and through the BCMEA social media, former students sent in photos or a video stating I am A and their job. I'm successful because of, with their school music program, and a thank you to their music teacher. We had virtual concerts, advocacy videos sent out on social media and local media. We were coordinating with our community partners. For example, Dave Sabarin of Tapestry Music spoke to the media regarding the impacts of these cuts on the community, local businesses, jobs. Long McQuaid provided equipment for our protests. Community ensembles continuously sent out information to their subscribers, asking them to write letters to the school board.
All right, administration. This is the one that I ended up in, mostly because I thought administration quite gets overlooked, but it always is important. And what we challenged ourselves with was basically to compile information from committees so they didn't have to do all of that themselves as well. And then while compiling that information, disseminating that information again right out to our individual school PACs, the rest of the committees, anyone who really needed to know that information. We were the communication network between committees, and we were just the general go-to for committees to communicate with outside SD61 members and partners, as well as the other committees. And then we actually ended up becoming, Amos itself ended up becoming a committee on our local Victoria Confederation of Parent Advisory Committees, or VCPAC. So we had a seat as a stakeholder at the board meetings, which really meant something because stakeholders are allowed to speak to each motion that comes up. So that was a really great move. And we were lucky to be invited to be a committee on that PAC. A little bit about trustees, MLAs, and district staff. It's important to know the relationship that trustees have with their senior staff. For example, in this situation in Victoria, the majority of trustees give implicit trust to their senior staff. This isn't a bad thing. However, it seemed that the board chair at the time was really unwilling to question or ask further information of any of the senior staff or superintendent. It almost felt as if they were scared to ask and put more work on anyone's plate. For me, being in the private sector for so long and actually being in finance, this felt very strange. Especially, in the finance industry, when you're constantly questioned, when the board asks you for numbers or asks you for support on your projections, if you say you don't know, and that's the end of it, you're going to be asked to produce that information and how fast you can produce it. And this just didn't happen in any of these meetings. You would get a question and the answer from senior staff would be, I don't know. And there was no qualifying that. And there was no saying, well, when will you know that? Anyway, we'll keep going, but it was very interesting to see that there was just no ask and following up on any of these things. I also just wanted to touch on developing relationships between parents and teachers. As a music educator, if you think you'll be facing a similar situation, I encourage you to find parents or community members who you can trust to do anything to help, and also ones that share your opinions and values. Cindy and I have known each other for a long time. There isn't anything I wouldn't do for her and her teaching partner, Melissa. I'm going to let Cindy jump in here with some of her thoughts, and then we'll look at some of the information that was shared and how detrimental it was to the board.
It was important that even as teachers, we talk to and develop a relationship with the school board trustees. A small group of music teachers went and met with almost all of the trustees to see where they were at for their support for music education. And we gave them information that we felt that was important to their decision making. We met with them multiple times and wanted to let them know how important it is to communicate directly with us because of false information they were receiving from the district staff. I also met with a former trustee chair and now I guess former MLA because she has retired, Carol James. She was vital 20 years ago in saving our strings program. Her granddaughter is enrolled in a high school strings program in our district. She gave me insight on how the board functions, how school budgets work, places in the budgets to look at, areas where funding would be cut, who else to talk to and to meet with. I also met with our former superintendents to gather insight and how music was funded and strategies to save our music programs, how to appeal to the school board trustees, areas of the budget to look at, who are the main trustee influencers, and etc. Here are some slides that were presented. They're interesting. So it's important to look at all the information being presented at board meetings. Look for bias, analyze information being presented, look for false information, look for misleading information. Look at the district strategy on how and why they are presenting information in a certain way.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here. You can see a savings and reinvestment slide. So in the financial world, what do you expect red to mean? Of course, anytime you're in the red, it isn't a good thing. This slide is misleading. If you look at the title, in this case, anything in blue is actually being proposed to be cut. And the small part in red at the bottom is actually what the board is willing to reinvest or put back into the budget. So in this case, blue is bad and red is good. Very tricky.
And in this slide, it's called Music by School. It presents to the public in a way that music isn't a program that has high enrollment and success. The blue columns are actually percent of overall middle school enrollment of the entire district for that specific school. So you can see like some of them are at 4%, 10%. The red column actually represent the percentage of FTE for middle school music in the overall district. So it has nothing to do with student music enrollment in any way. So the heading is very, very misleading. And then next, there was a survey put out to the public, which we were all shocked at. If you read it, it says the strategic plan of our school district focuses on 3 goals, including 10 strategies. What goal of the strategic plan do you think needs the most investment? And so the first one is create an inclusive and culturally responsive learning environment that will support and improve all learners' personal and academic success. That's great. And then the second one is create a culturally responsive learning environment that will support Indigenous learners' personal and academic success. And then the third one, create an inclusive and culturally responsive learning environment that will support all learners' physical and mental well-being. So what's weird that we found was it's completely inconceivable that parents should have any input into whether the district should support Indigenous learners' personal and academic success and to decide that. So we felt that that was racist, and that isn't for them. Yeah, that isn't for them to decide. And then the next slide.
Next one. This was a tipping point. Early in February, during a board committee meeting, Indigenous participants were asked by a board member to leave the meeting. I should qualitate this with the fact that the board had also recently developed an Indigenous advisory committee with members of the 4 nations in Greater Victoria. After the board meeting where this slide was presented, a prominent Indigenous artist and UVic faculty member, Carrie Newman, wrote a condemning letter resigning from the Indigenous Advisory Committee. At the same time, chiefs from both local Indigenous nations refused to work with the board unless full public in-person apologies were received from the superintendent, the board chair, and the board vice chair. I just have to point out here that in one half of the slide, they're asking if Indigenous learners participate in band, and in the other half, they are calling themselves a culturally responsive organization. We talk a lot about equity with Indigenous learners especially, but in schools, equity. And the fact that they're pitting Indigenous learners and asking if they use band, to me, does not support equity. All right, let's talk a little bit about what we learned. So we're going to dive into budgets a little bit and dive into financials. It's a little bit dry, but this is where I shine. What we learned the budget process, how district budgets work, and different facets of the budget. We're just going to dive into those straight away. So Cindy, if you wanted to go to the next slide. A budget is basically a prediction of the statement of operations for the coming year. And statement of operations is what you might sometimes hear as the income statement or profit and loss statement. Financial statements can be really long as 50 plus pages. But the statement of operations can usually be found near the beginning of the financial statements. And the one we're going to view today is probably around page 7 or 8, I think I found it. The statement of operations consists of mainly 3 parts: the schedule of operating operations, the schedule of special purpose operations, and the schedule of capital operations. There are many other schedules contained in the financial statement that break down these 3 main parts even further, such as dollars spent on salaries or projects, etc. Most financial statements will show the statement of operations actual figures versus what was budgeted. So you can see here how accurate the district was and this will show exactly how accurate the district was in predicting revenues and expenses. So you can see here the actual numbers are bolded. They are compared to what was budgeted and predicted before the final actual numbers came in. I just want to point out that the amounts contained in revenue will also include amounts or dollars that may not have actually been received yet, but they are for services that were in that school year, and such the same as with expenses. So it might include dollars that may not have actually been paid out yet, but they are actually for services that were bought in that school year. Since the statement of operations and the corresponding schedules are so far apart in the financial statement documents, I wanted to combine them into a document where I could see how it all fits together. So we're just going to look here at some schedules, and here you can see the bolded versus budget. And then we'll go to the next one there. And this is kind of where I combined them into a document where I could see how it fits all together. So I created a simple spreadsheet that looks like this. It was easy to add up all 3 main parts to see if they matched what was in the statement of operations. So you can see that the revenues from operations, from capital operations, and from special purpose operations add up to be the revenues in the statement of operations. So those 3 schedules are actually schedules of the total statement of operations. It was also easier to see what parts were actually causing deficits. Interestingly enough, the 2020-21 school year was the first in 5 years to have a deficit in operating operations. You can see that the majority of the deficit comes from capital operations. If you take all of the operations together, you can see that the deficit isn't nearly as much as you add them all together. It doesn't come up to quite as much as it shows. The district told us that there was a structural deficit, but I wasn't buying that. I created a video on my analysis, and that will actually probably show how they all come together so that parents and community members could see it in a simplified way. And so Cindy's going to show it there. I think it's 6.5 minutes. Contrary to what you may have heard, a structural deficit is not difficult or complicated to understand. A structural deficit is when a public body consistently runs a deficit even when the economy is at its potential. In other words, it is a chronic issue of spending more than what you receive in revenues. A structural deficit doesn't happen in 1 year, but rather over many years. Notice the word chronic. It is recurring and long-standing. So does SD61 have a structural deficit? These numbers you are seeing are taken from the SD61 financial statements, which can be found on their website. They have been audited by KPMG, and these numbers are for the last 5 fiscal years. You can see that the 2020-2021 year is still missing. That is because this fiscal year doesn't end until June 30th, 2021, so it isn't complete yet. The total statement of operations is rolled up from 3 different areas: operating, capital operations, and special purpose operations. The revenues from these 3 different areas make up the total revenues in the statement of operations. The same goes for expenses. A surplus or deficit happens simply by subtracting your expenses from your revenues. If your expenses are higher than your revenues, you have a deficit. If your expenses are lower than your revenues, you have a surplus. You can see here that 3 of the 5 most recent fiscal years, there was a surplus reported. This indicates that we do not have a problem of chronically spending more than we are receiving and no structural deficit. If we dig down into these areas, you can see on the operating side, we actually had 4 out of the 5 years with a surplus and only 1 year with a small deficit. Why then are we cutting student services? Student services fall into our operating area, which clearly shows a healthy relationship between revenues and expenses. In capital operations is where you can see a consistent recurring deficit. We are continually spending more than we are getting in revenues in capital operations. So why all this talk about a structural deficit? Well, every year, a deficit is budgeted. This is consistent and recurring and long-standing. So a structural deficit is budgeted. You can see here that the budget consistently forecasts a deficit anywhere between $6 and $10 million a year. On average, over the last 5 years, by almost $7 million a year. But our final numbers don't ever show that level of deficit. So why is there such a difference? The difference comes from continually underestimating revenues. You can see on average over the last 5 years, revenues have been underestimated by almost $10.5 million a year. So why are we cutting vital student programming when clearly the issue lies mainly with our budgeting process and not with what is actually happening in our finances? Let's take a look at accumulated surplus. Simply put, accumulated surplus is the bucket where surpluses at the end of the year go, or in the case of a deficit, where the money is taken to cover the deficit. The SD61 accumulated surplus is divided into capital accumulated surplus and operating accumulated surplus. You can see here that at the end of the 2015-2016 year, the surplus was $68.966 million. $46.166 million of that was capital accumulated surplus, and 22.8 of that was operating accumulated surplus. Interestingly, in 2016-2017, capital operations had a deficit of $2.659 million. Yet, the capital accumulated surplus actually increased. And our operating side had a surplus of $2.955 million, but the operating accumulated surplus actually decreased. Why is that? Well, it looks like there was a transfer of funds here in capital operations to cover the deficit, a transfer from other funds. Where does this number come from? Well, if we take the surplus from special purpose and the surplus from operating And the change in the accumulated surplus from operating, you can see that the sum down here at the bottom comes to $6.218 million, which is exactly the amount that was transferred in to cover that capital operations deficit plus some. This is a similar story for subsequent years. You see these transfers coming in and you see a decrease in the operating accumulated surplus. So we see a surplus in both operating and special purpose, yet our operating accumulated surplus is depleting. Rather than going directly to cutting vital student programming, the district needs to look at ways to correct their consistent inability to forecast revenues. We know that the district has pulled funds from operating accumulated surplus to fund the SD Burnside overspend. Is this why funds are being pulled from our operating accumulated surplus into our capital accumulated surplus? Are students being made to pay for this overspend? Right, so the budget process and how school budgets work. So here in BC, Nanaimo School District, their website, which is SD68, describes the process very succinctly. The school district's budget year extends from July 1st to June 30th. From March to May, the Board of Education is working to set the budget for the next year. The budget is called the preliminary budget. In January of each year, once all the enrollment information for the year is verified, adjustments are made and the board approves an amended budget for the balance of the fiscal year. No sooner is the amended budget approved than the board starts working on the budget for the next year. Most school districts and government entities build a budget using a status quo. Greater Victoria School District is one of these. A status quo budget is simply the same budget from last year with some amendments. The district will start with everything they budgeted the year before, but amend it to what was over or underspent in the current year. The advantage of having a status quo budget is that it costs way less in staffing or manpower to put together. Really, the only work involved in fitting the budget to the following year is making the amendments for over and underspending in the current year. However, we discovered this could be a huge disadvantage as well. It means that individual expense categories are not examined on a yearly basis. Suggestions are put forward by senior staff on amendments or cuts to balance the budget, especially in a deficit situation. For example, exempt administration Pro D, exempt administration meals, cell phone expenses, etc. You can probably see where I'm going with this. They don't like to touch those, and in a status quo budget, they don't have to. Once expenses are set for certain categories, they aren't fully examined again. Who knows how long ago these expense accounts were actually created? The question is, when was the current status quo even created? Instead of examining each of these expenditure categories in further detail or looking for ways to reduce costs in some of these areas, they are left as status quo and cuts are found in other areas, and unfortunately, usually student funds. Revenue, on the other hand, is completely dependent, of course, on the Ministry of Education, and this is speaking strictly to here in BC. I would assume that most provinces are the same. In the province's annual budget, they determine the funding amount per student, or in the case of high school students, per class. If you work in BC, you probably all know that the enrollment projections for the following school year are due in January of the previous year and are announced on or before March 15th. This can cause issues with the budget if predicted enrollment is down, or in the case of a pandemic, which is when this happened in that year, enrollment is uncertain and projections are conservatively low. So enrollment and funding isn't recalculated again until the end of September. Meanwhile, a balanced budget is expected to be by the end of June. So unless a school district is growing fast, this quite often means significant cuts to current programs to balance that budget. So a real problem between enrollment projections and balancing a budget and knowing how much revenue you're going to get. I will point out funding for the 2021 and 22 school year increased in BC by approximately 4%. The year before saw an increase of only 1%. We know that the total increase in funding is directly related to negotiated increases from collective bargaining. However, since 2018, CPP rates have increased by 0.75 or 1/4%, and the maximum contribution rate has increased by just over $600 per employee from 2020. EI rates have stayed pretty much the same, but again, the total maximum annual contribution amount has been raised by almost $50 an employee from 2020. And then in BC, we also saw an employer health tax come into effect in 2019 in BC. That's another 1.95% of total remuneration, including salaries, bonuses, vacation pay, and the like, that school districts have to pay to the province. It doesn't seem like the increases to funding have taken any of these new expenses into account, let alone inflation costs for many other things that are integral to running a school district. So where do these expenses I just explained come from? You guessed it, unfortunately, existing student funding. So after all that unfortunate news, our hopes, when we did this in October, we talked about our hopes for the upcoming budget. And of course that we're starting, to get really in depth now. Our hopes were at the end of last year, the district had actually promised to create a budget committee in which stakeholders could take part and be part of. In November of 2021, that actually came to fruition. Myself and another parent joined the budget advisory committee of the district as VC PAC members. So Victoria, our district PAC. Unfortunately, some of you may be familiar with all of the drama that's going on in our district right now. Presently, 5 members of our board have deigned to suspend 2 of their own trustees. After this highly undemocratic move, all stakeholders and rights holders, in an unprecedented and never before seen show of solidarity, have actually pulled their support from our board, and we will no longer be dealing with them. So unfortunately, we won't be attending those budget advisory committees anymore. We had also at the end of last year discussed starting a GoFundMe page to allow Amos to engage a forensic accountant to analyze the budget. There was a lot of talk about hiding funds. And so we wanted a little bit more clarity on whether that was actually happening. We haven't done that yet. Of course, with all the drama going on, there's been a lot more to take in. We did initiate a letter writing campaign to the Ministry of Education to ask for creating a hybrid funding model that somehow combines the elementary and secondary model to create one specific for middle school, so that extra classes or out of school classes are fully funded. We did also include asking the ministry to earmark funds specifically for music education and to really look at the funding that they're giving students, and to look at increasing that according to the statistics I gave you earlier with CPP and EI rates, and also our EHT. The biggest push right now is to find advocates that will run in the election for trustees, because we have an election coming up in October of this year. So that's the big push right now, supporting the 2 trustees that are going through suspension, and also, looking to see how we can get the 5 that really have not shown any student support out of there, and get some new people in who really have students at the heart, of the district. All rights holders and stakeholders are tiring of the constant fight, not to mention what the few trustees sitting on the board that are actually advocates of our students are feeling. At this point, we feel the end of this board is in sight, and we plan to hold meetings to ensure we get a board that puts all students first. And then in conclusion, a positive note, our community is amazing. There's such talent and skills in your parents and your community. Use them to your advantage. Really think about how you can put your resources to use. For example, I was talking earlier about that parent that took notes at our initial meeting and just noticed the themes coming out of it. She's a project manager. She didn't really have a lot of time to give up to work on other events or sit on a subcommittee, but her input was really critical onto how we set up our campaign. Cindy, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, as a teacher, it's important that what you do or what you say or what you post on social media isn't viewed as criticizing the employer. We used our personal emails and Zoom accounts rather than using anything owned by the school district because we knew they were monitored. Winona at the GVTA was able to speak up in this manner because of her role as our local union president, and she did it so many times at board meetings and also in the media. And it's also really important to support your fellow music educators, to get support from your fellow BCTF and QP staff at your school. We also did get a lot of support from our school administrators, but as they are, quote, agents of the district or minions of the board, they had their hands tied in many ways. And so I just have to thank my family for supporting me through that process. It was hard on all of them because I was in meetings almost every evening. And yeah, it was just really hard. And Karen, of course, who's been an amazing partner through this whole process, and to my teaching partner, Melissa McKnight, who kept our music program going while I was at all these meetings. Crystal Hammer was a former VC PAC chair at the time, and we really collaborated a lot with her, and to Winona and Carolyn at the GVT for supporting all of us and giving me TOC days, for allowing me to be part of the process from that side of the union. Yeah, so I guess that's it. Thank you so much for attending our session. If you have any thoughts or questions, we're happy to answer them as best as we can.
Well, thank you so much, Cindy and Karen, on behalf of the coalition. I just want to first thank you for your presentation tonight. Wow, I certainly cannot believe you guys are a powerhouse team, and the students and the teachers and the children in the Greater Victoria area are certainly very fortunate to have you on their sides. Cindy, your passion, I've known you for a few years now. Your passion for what you do and your commitment to what you do is inspiring. And, I applaud you for it. Many people, when facing something like this, in addition to all of the things that we already deal with on a daily basis for our students, to take on an entire school board is pretty remarkable. So I congratulate you for that. And Karen, before we started the meeting tonight, you mentioned that you had started your career in education, and it was certainly evident tonight in how well and with such perfect detail you walked us through the finances. I just hope I have a Karen on my team if this ever happens, because I heard all the numbers you were talking about, but I'm not a numbers person. So, quite often that is to our detriment as music educators. We know what we're passionate about, it's teaching music, but, understanding how to read budgets and line items is something that it's a wonderful skill that you have, and a talent and a gift that you brought to that table. So congratulations to both of you. I know this video is going to be a wonderful resource for, I hope that we never have to actually use it. I hope that future music programs will not face the challenge that you faced, but I know that if they do, this will not only serve as a wonderful a wonderful starting point to start thinking about what their options are. But I know it'll be reassuring, because the way that you guys were able to pull that off, that was just remarkable. And I know from where I am, my classroom on PEI, I was hearing all sorts of wonderful stories about the work you were doing, and it inspired me here on the East Coast. So know that the work that you did was appreciated and certainly heard far and wide. With that having been said, I know that there may be some questions. So I would ask that if anybody would like to either, ask a question of Cindy or Karen, or maybe even just extend their own thanks and congratulations, I would ask that under the reactions emoji that you just raise your hand, and we'll keep order that way. So would anyone like to speak?
I'm just gonna put my email in the chat for anybody if you want to, if you can't think of anything, because there's a lot of information that we presented, so it may take some time to process. So there's my email if you want to contact me if you can think of any questions afterwards as well.
Thank you. Really appreciate that, Cindy. Are there any questions from the group?
Only congratulations for all this work.
Thank you. It was a lot of work.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's ongoing. As I said, the drama in the district that's happening right now is, they've essentially removed all of the trustees who were opposed to everything that we were doing last year. And it's not just music, it's counseling services, it's reading services, it's EAs. That's basically what this is about. So we do have a budget process that's happening now, and we'll have to wait and see. It may be that we see those cuts coming this year instead of last year. Interestingly enough, though, they just did their amended budget for that January, addition of once they've accumulated everything. And what I predicted in the presentation, the YouTube video that you saw, we did see another surplus instead of a deficit. So that was interesting.
Wow. Yeah, I don't envy you. I know. I don't know if you're aware, but here on Prince Edward Island, we've not had trustees or a school board for quite some time. And yeah, it's and in fact, what they did was they amalgamated the school board with so we now just have one public schools branch, which is actually a branch of the government. It's not actually an independent board. So it's amazing to see how how things are different from coast to coast. And I mean, everyone's situation is unique, but unfortunately, the fight to advocate for what we do doesn't seem to be unique. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Well, I know we're all certainly still absorbing all of the wonderful information that was shared tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Kirk. He doesn't know this, but I'm going to turn it over to him for some final words and to thank our wonderful co-hosts. Once again, really appreciate you sharing this with us. I'm glad that we have this recording now, and thank you for Cindy for putting your email out there. I'm sure that you will hear from some people, but again, let's hope that it's just to say what a great job and not to say help, I find myself in a similar situation. So thank you again, and I'm going to pass it over to Kirk.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirsten, sorry. And thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Karen, for having been through your presentation once. I have to say that I was even more struck this time by the amount of obvious work and dedication that you put into this good fight. And I would have to say that because of you, there's hundreds of students, thousands of students in Victoria that have been the benefit of that. So thank you. I think now more than ever, it's important that we're sharing this story and taking time to celebrate these successes. And I hope that as your new boards come in and you navigate these next little bits here, that things go well for you. And thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight, and we'll see you hopefully at our next town hall. Good night, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you. Bonsoir.